Cold is honest in a way that warmth is not. Warmth asks you to stay, to settle, to let your guard down into something comfortable. Cold asks you nothing. It simply is, and you either respond to it or you don't. I had spent a significant portion of my adult life in cold places. The pre-dawn desert cold of Al Anbar province in 2007. The institutional cold of a field hospital tent in Fallujah that the space heaters never fully reached. And most recently the specific cold of the utility room on the cardiac ICU at Carver University Medical Center, into which the Director of Nursing Services had sent me at 11:15 on a Tuesday morning to clean bedpans as a corrective measure for what she called persistent insubordination. I was standing in that cold with a bedpan in my rubber-gloved hands when I heard them coming. Not from the elevator, not from the stairwell, but rising through the walls themselves, the specific sound of a formation in motion. Boots on pavement, in a unified purpose that the civilian world does not replicate. I had not heard that sound in 14 years, and I recognized it in my chest before I recognized it in my ears. They thought I was a difficult employee who needed managing. They were right that I was difficult. They had the wrong definition. Then, 11 United States Marines in dress blues walked through the cardiac ICU in a formation tight enough to feel the air move, called a name that nobody on that floor had ever heard me called, and I set down the bedpan and walked out of the cold. My name is Joe Mercer. I am 47 years old. I have been a cardiac ICU nurse at Carver University Medical Center for 5 months, which means I am no longer new, but am not yet trusted. A specific kind of limbo that units this size have become expert at maintaining. The cardiac ICU at Carver is a 12-bed unit, small enough for everyone to know everyone's business, and layered enough for the hierarchy to have developed the complexity of a small government. I had been cataloging it since week 1. The way I catalog every environment I enter, not to navigate it, but to understand it. Because understanding is the first condition of operating effectively. And I have been operating effectively within difficult environments since I was 22 years old and commissioned as a second lieutenant in the United States Marine Corps. I do not tell people I was a Marine. Not as a conversation opener, not as a deflection when I am challenged, not as a credential in environments where credentials are being compared. I spent 12 years as a Marine officer, 4 of them as a combat, deployed trauma nurse in roles that did not technically exist according to the official table of organization, and that I am not able to describe in full in this format. And I separated in 2011 with the rank of captain and a set of knowledge and experience that the civilian nursing world has not known what to do with for 14 years. I did not tell them what to do with it. I took the jobs available, kept my head down and focused on the patients, which is the part of the work I actually wanted to do and which has nothing to do with who respects whom in a break room. The cardiac ICU at Carver smells like the cold that machinery produces, the ventilators and the LVAD pumps and the IAP consoles, the specific mechanical exhalation of devices that keep human hearts performing, functions the hearts themselves can no longer reliably manage. It is a different smell from every other unit in the hospital, less antiseptic, more electrical, with an undertone of the particular anxiety that lives in rooms where the margin of stability is measured in minutes and where the machines and the nurses are the only things standing between a patient and a very fast kind of wrong. The lights in the cardiac ICU run softer than surgical suite lights, not dim, but diffused, because the patients here are long stay, and the overhead brightness that serves a trauma bay would be its own kind of harm after the first 72 hours. The monitors run their rhythms in a near constant conversation that becomes, after a week, as readable as language. I had been fluent in that language since week 2. To the cardiac ICU staff at Carver, I was the transfer who knew too much and showed it at inconvenient moments. To me, the unit was a controlled environment with known variables and a clear hierarchy. which after Al-Anbar province was something close to paradise, and which I had no interest in disrupting, even when the hierarchy made decisions I did not agree with, which it did with a regularity that I had learned to absorb without expression. The director of nursing services at Carver was a woman named Patricia Broad. She had not worked a patient floor in 9 years, and she held her position through control of budget allocations, staffing approvals, and performance review cycles. The kind of authority that physicians find irrelevant, and that nurses with mortgages understand is real. She was 57 years old and maintained the careful posture of someone who had learned, in 9 years behind a desk, that posture is the part of authority that reads at a distance. She had called me into her office twice in 5 months. The first time was to discuss what she characterized as a pattern of challenging physician orders without appropriate deference. The second time was the Tuesday. The Tuesday started with Mr. Gerald Finch in bed 7. Mr. Finch was 69 years old, 4 days post-LAD implant, and his overnight numbers had been telling me a story for 3 hours that the story the day team's board was showing me did not support. Not dramatically wrong. Nothing that screamed for immediate escalation in the way that dramatic wrongness does. Quietly wrong. The kind of wrong that lives in the gap between 2 data points that are both within acceptable range individually and that form a pattern when you know what you are reading. I knew what I was reading. I had been reading that pattern in different patients in different settings for long enough that the reading was no longer a conscious process. It was simply something my eyes did when they looked at numbers, the same way they read text. I flagged it to the attending. Dr. Roy Tillis, who had been on the cardiac EQ service for 7 years and whose clinical record was genuinely excellent, reviewed the numbers and told me the patient was within parameters. I noted that the parameters did not account for the trajectory. He told me that trajectory management was his department. I documented my concern in the nursing notes with a timestamp and returned to the floor. At 9:45, I flagged it again. The numbers had not crossed any threshold. The pattern had deepened. Dr. Tillis looked at me with the expression of a man who has been challenged by the same nurse twice in 2 hours and who has arrived at the conclusion that the challenge is the problem rather than the thing being challenged. "Miss Mercer," he said, "I understand you have experience. I respect that. But this patient is within parameters, and my clinical judgment is that intervention is premature. When the numbers tell me otherwise, I will act." He paused. "I'd appreciate it if you'd trust my judgment." "I trust your judgment on the parameters," I said. "I am asking you to look at what the parameters don't show." He looked at the board. He looked at me. He went to write his notes. At 10:50, Mr. Finch's levied through an alarm that was not subtle and did not require a pattern to read. Dr. Tillis was on the floor within 90 seconds. He managed it, competently, with the clinical excellence his record reflected, and Mr. Finch stabilized within 14 minutes and was not a serious incident. 14 minutes is a long time in cardiac intensive care. And then he left without looking at me. I had not expected him to. Patricia Broad arrived on the floor at 11:05, which was faster than I would have expected given that her office was 2 floors down, which told me that Dr. Tillis had made a call before the code alarm had fully cleared. She had the posture. She had the clipboard she carried not as a working document, but as an object, the prop of institutional authority, something to hold while delivering a verdict. "Miss Mercer," she said. Not in the corridor. In the clean utility room doorway, with the door ajar, which was the specific geography of a conversation she wanted to be able to contain. "I've spoken with Dr. Tillis. I've reviewed the incident. I'd be glad to walk you through the nursing documentation," I said. The timeline, she said, shows a nurse who challenged a physician's clinical judgment twice in a 2-hour window, disrupted the collaborative care environment of this unit, and contributed to an incident atmosphere that this IQ cannot sustain. She did not raise her voice. She had the tone of someone delivering a settled conclusion, not a negotiated one. This is not the first time we've discussed your difficulty with the established hierarchy. The patient is stable. She said it cleanly, like a door closing. Miss Mercer, I need you to understand that the role of a bedside nurse in this unit is not to second-guess the clinical decisions of the attending physicians. It is to provide excellent direct care within the parameters of your scope and the physician's plan. She looked at me with the flat assessment of a woman who has managed difficult employees for 9 years and has found her method. I need you to take the rest of this morning to reflect on that. The utility room on this floor needs a full cleaning and reset. Bedpans, linen restocking, equipment check. I'd like that completed before lunch. I looked at her. She looked at me. I want to be honest about the 4 seconds of silence that followed, because I think it matters. What happened was this: I, a former captain in the United States Marine Corps who had commanded personnel in combat in Al-Anbar province and had executed genuinely difficult orders without complaint, considered for 4 seconds whether I was capable of doing what I was about to agree to do. And then I picked up the rubber gloves from the cart beside the door. I am not that rank anymore, I reminded myself, the way I had reminded myself many times in 14 years of civilian life. I am a bedside nurse in a cardiac EKO, and my authority in this building is limited to the scope of my license and the good opinion of people who have never heard of Al-Anbar province and do not need to. And if keeping this job means cleaning bedpans at 11 in the morning because a physician called a nursing director before the resuscitation algorithm had finished running, then that is what keeping this job costs today, and I will pay it. I put on the gloves. And then I went into the cold. I want to tell you about Mr. Russell Ibarra first, because he is the part of this story that people skip when they tell it, and that I cannot skip. Mr. Ibarra was in bed 3. He was 58 years old, 18 days post-open heart surgery, in the slow plateau where dramatic improvements have stabilized and only distance remains. He had been a gunnery sergeant in the Marine Corps for 23 years. He had the specific uprightness that long-service Marines carry even in hospital gowns, something built into the frame over decades that posture alone cannot explain. I had been checking on him twice per round since his first day on the unit. Not because his numbers needed it. Because he was carrying the particular isolation of someone whose structure had been removed from him. The belonging and the meaning of decades of service, and who was in a building where the people around him were doing their best but did not speak his interior language. I spoke it. I didn't say so. I simply spoke it, in the small ways, in how I answered his questions directly, in the flat acknowledgement of his daily progress without premature celebration. In the economy of my explanations, he understood, within the first week, that I was not a civilian nurse who had read about military culture. We had an agreement of the kind that forms between people who recognize each other. Unspoken, simply operative. He was awake when I passed bed 3 on my way to the utility room. He looked at me. He looked at the rubber gloves in my hand. His face made no expression, which was its own expression. Utility room detail, I said, as though reporting it. He looked at me for 1 more second. Carry on, he said, as though giving an order, which he was. I carried on. I was in the utility room for 22 minutes. I will not tell you they were easy minutes. I will tell you that I cleaned what needed cleaning, and restocked what needed restocking, and performed the equipment check with the precision I bring to everything. Because the precision is not conditional on the dignity of the task. I kept my hands moving, and my mind as empty as I could manage. And I was almost succeeding at the empty part, when the sound arrived. It came through the building's walls before it came through the door. A cadence. Boots, multiple, synchronized in the way that only deliberate training synchronizes them, striking the hard floor of the corridor outside in a tempo I had not heard in 14 years, and that my body registered before my mind had processed the input. Not running, marching, controlled, purposeful. The sound of people moving in formation toward a specific destination, at a pace that communicated that the destination had already been decided, and the question of arrival was simply one of elapsed time. I set down what I was holding. In 30 seconds, this utility room was going to be the wrong place to be. Something had already changed in the hallway. I could feel it in the walls. The door of the utility room was partially open. And then I heard Patricia Brode's voice from the corridor, her managed tone, her prepared statement register. This is a restricted clinical unit. I'm going to need to understand your purpose here. A pause. A brief one. First Sergeant Dale Kimura, 1st Battalion, 5th Marines, Camp Pendleton. The voice was unhurried, the way voices are when the person using them has no reason to hurry. We're here to see one of your nurses. Name of Mercer. Another pause. Our nursing staff is not available for, ma'am. Not rude. Not deferential. The specific neutrality of a man who has already processed this conversation and arrived at its endpoint and is simply waiting for the other person to catch up. We've come a considerable distance. If Miss Mercer is on this floor, I'd like to know. I pushed open the utility room door. I had taken off the rubber gloves. I do not remember taking them off. They were in my hand, and then they were on the utility cart, and then I was in the doorway, and the corridor was in front of me. There were 11 of them. Dress blues, the dark fabric, the red stripe down the trouser seam, the white cover, the specific precision of a uniform that communicates, in its every pressed line, that the person wearing it has chosen to represent something larger than themselves and is dressed accordingly. They were standing in 2 ranks in the cardiac EQ corridor, between the nurse's station and the rooms, filling the space with a formality that the space had never contained before, and that the morning shift was currently processing from various positions of frozen stillness. Nurses, residents, the unit clerk, who had half risen from her chair, Dr. Tillis, who had come back to the floor for reasons unrelated to this, and who was now standing at the edge of the station with the expression of a man who has entered a room and found it reconfigured. And Mr. Russell Ibarra, in the doorway of bed 3, in his hospital gown, and his 23 years of Marine Corps structure, standing at a posture that his 18 days post-open-heart surgery body should not have been able to achieve. First Sergeant Kimura was at the front of the formation. He was perhaps 50, with the weathered economy of a man who had spent decades in conditions that were not gentle, and he had the quality that long-service NCOs develop. A precision of attention, an absence of wasted movement. He saw me in the utility room doorway. He did not call a code name. He did not say a designation or a call sign. He said the thing they had come to say, which was the thing that had been true for 23 years and that this building had not known for 5 months. Captain Mercer, he said. The cardiac EQ was quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when a word has just reorganized them. Not a code name, a rank. The rank I had held and that I had not been addressed by in 14 years, in a hospital corridor. In front of the nurses who had been managing me as a difficult employee and the physician who had called a nursing director before the resuscitation algorithm was finished, and Mr. Russell Ibarra in the doorway of bed 3, who had known for 17 days that this word was the correct word for me, and who was now hearing it spoken. I walked out of the utility room. I walked down the corridor. I did not walk quickly. The formation did not change. They held it, which was its own message. The message that they were not done yet, and had not come all this way to deliver half of what they had brought. Kimura took one step forward. He reached inside his jacket and produced a folded document, a standard de forme, in a format I recognized before I could read the specifics, and he held it with both hands and read from it in the flat, factual voice of someone reciting a record in an official capacity, which is what he was doing. Captain Josephine Mercer, United States Marine Corps, honorably separated 2011. Service record: 12 years active duty, 4 combat deployments. Al Anbar Province, 2006 through 2008. Fallujah, 2008, 2 classified attachments, undisclosed locations, 2009 and 2010. He paused. In that service, Captain Mercer provided trauma nursing care and field surgical support to 231 personnel. She received the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal with Valor Device, the Combat Action Ribbon, the Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal, and a unit citation from the Commanding General, 1st Marine Division, for actions during the Second Battle of Fallujah that are detailed in the classified annex. He folded the document. He looked up. She holds a master's degree in critical care nursing, board certification in cardiac intensive care, and a clinical record that in 14 years of civilian practice has not produced a single patient safety incident. He looked at Patricia Broad, who was standing at the edge of the station with the posture she always maintained and the expression of a woman whose posture was working harder than usual. That is the nurse you sent to clean bedpans this morning. The corridor held its breath. Patricia Broad did not speak. She looked at the document in Kimura's hands. She looked at the formation behind him. She looked at me with an expression that was doing something I had not seen her face do in 5 months, a recalculation visible enough to be read. The specific processing of a person who has been managing a situation on the basis of a description that has just been replaced with a photograph. Dr. Tillis, at the edge of the station, said nothing. His face had the quality of a man who had arrived at a conclusion 2 hours ago and was currently in the process of revising it, in public, without an exit. Mr. Russell Ibarra, in the doorway of bed 3, was still standing. He was not at attention. He was simply upright. The kind of upright that costs something after open-heart surgery and that he was paying without showing the cost, because there are things worth standing straight for, and he had just watched one of them be named in a corridor. Kimura looked at me. He had the contained directness of a man who has delivered what he came to deliver and is now performing the last part of it, which is the personal part, the part beneath the official record. "We heard you were here," he said. "3rd Recon got a message through Lieutenant Parson. Parson said you'd been posted to a hospital near the base." His voice did not change register. The colonel asked if we'd come. We said yes. He paused. "We wanted to make sure you knew the record was correct." I looked at him for a moment. "The record was always correct," I said. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "That's why we came." Behind him, the formation, without instruction, without order, in the simultaneous movement of 11 men who had rehearsed nothing and needed to rehearse nothing, came to attention. The sound of it was not loud. It was the sound of fabric adjusting and heels meeting, and the specific crispness of 11 sets of dress blues aligning to a single axis. It was the quietest sound in the room and the most significant. I returned the salute. 11 Marines in dress blues in a cardiac EQ corridor, and my right arm came up with the specific precision of a motion I had performed thousands of times and that my body had not forgotten in 14 years of not performing it. 3 count. Fingers straight. Thumb tucked. The old geometry, exact as ever. Then I lowered my arm. Kimura nodded once. He looked at the formation. "Fall out," he said quietly. And then, to me, "The colonel sends his regards." I said, "Tell him the next round's on me." Something moved across Kimura's face, not quite a smile, but the shape a face makes when a smile would be appropriate and the situation calls for something more contained. He turned the formation with a single word, and they moved back down the corridor the way they had come, in the unified cadence that had traveled through the walls before they arrived, and the cardiac Iku watched them go in a silence that did not end until the last footfall had faded at the elevator. Then, the unit breathed. Patricia Brode was still at the edge of the station. She looked at me. I want to be accurate about what was in her face. Not shame. She was not a person who moved easily into shame, but something more structural. The specific expression of a person whose system of assessment has just failed publicly, and who is intelligent enough to understand the failure and professional enough to be calculating already how to proceed. She was not a bad person. She was a person who had made decisions on incomplete information and was now in possession of the complete version. "Miss Mercer," she said, "the utility room can wait. Go back to your patients." "Yes," I said. "It can." I went to Mr. Finch's room first, because Mr. Finch's LVAD numbers were what they were, and because the morning had not changed that. I checked his console. I noted his telemetry. His numbers were good. Genuinely good. The kind of good that meant the 14 minutes of this morning were receding in the rear view. I updated the chart with the timestamp and my name. Then I went to bed 3. Mr. Ibarra was back in bed. The standing had cost him, and he was not pretending it hadn't, which was the most honest thing I had seen in the unit all morning. He looked at me when I came in with the eyes of a man who did not need to say anything and knew I knew that. I checked his chart. I checked his incision. I adjusted the angle of his bed by 4 degrees, which was a small thing that the protocol did not specify and that I could see in the way he was holding his shoulder that he needed. "Gunnery Sergeant," I said. "Captain," he said. We left it there. It was the right place to leave it. I went back to the station. I pulled up Mr. Finch's numbers and began the mid-morning documentation cycle, timestamps, assessments, the careful threading of clinical fact into a record that would tell the next nurse exactly what she needed to know when her shift started and mine ended. The monitors ran their conversation around me, and the machines breathed their electrical breath, and the unit did what it always did, which was hold the line between the patients it contained and the thing those patients were being held back from, one careful minute at a time. The rubber gloves were still in the utility room. I had not gone back for them. I did not need to. Some things you put down and do not pick up again. If this story found you, like it, share it with someone who's been sent somewhere small and knows they're more than the task they've been handed. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of the ones who carried their rank quietly, long after anyone stopped asking for it. And drop your city in the comments. I want to know where you're watching from. Let's see how far the captain's story travels.